Let's go. Letter 2. Dear Building Better Leaders, I've recently stepped into a seat at the executive table. On paper, this is everything I've worked for, but I'm wrestling with a decision that's been eating at me. We are structuring a part of the business, and one of the proposals on the table is to scale back a program that was originally designed to support women returning to the workforce. Things like flexible hours, coaching, and reintegration support. The data shows it is not profitable enough. I've been told we need to cut what's nice to have so we can focus on growth. But on the other hand, this touches something deeply personal. Supporting women in the workplace has always been a core value for me. I know what it's like to be overlooked because you're a mother or to lose momentum in your career because of caregiving. Letting this program go feels like I'm turning my back on something that matters, not just professionally, but personally. I'm torn. If I push back too hard, I risk being seen as emotional or biased. If I stay quiet, I'm complicit in dismantling something that reflects the very values I've championed. How do I reconcile what's right for the business and what feels right in my gut? This is tough. Clearly, this person is a senior manager who's recently promoted to be at the table. And I'm just wondering, any initial thoughts when you first read this letter?
Yeah, I think this is very common, lah, to be honest, right? Between balancing short-term decisions over long-term decisions. I mean, this is kind of how I would summarize it, right?
Okay.
Go longer-term business value, longer-term business strategy. So that's linked to technically longer-term goals. And then obviously short-term goals, which is really all about driving profits at that point in time, right? So this is, in my view, is very, very common. For me, I think to your point as well, how do we think about this question a little bit differently? I think most often than not, when we are all in C-suite, we have stakeholders and we have board members that we need to think about, which is very real. Because then anyone can argue to say, but if you don't think about the short-term profits, then we got long-term,
Yeah.
right? So I tend to want to take a more balanced approach. And I think every decision I will always kind of put a bit of a ratio, right? A mental ratio in my head. Is this decision that is, say, 80% more for short term, 20% more for long term? Or is this decision, 60% long term, 40% short term? And how do we balance that? So, but because there's not enough details in the letter around what the program is, fundamentally, based on what I'm reading, it makes sense for us to think about continuing to support this initiative. I think my advice is typically I like to go numerical, meaning if fundamentally we believe that this has value for the business on the longer term, I would always use data and facts to argue the point.
Wow.
Because at the end of it, we run a business. It cannot be based on emotions. Emotions is one, but emotions has to be backed by data in my view. So my advice is to go for the cost of this program to continue to run against the potential longer term impact and return for the business. What does that look like versus, say, a short term, right? And if based on the cost restructure. And is there a middle ground? Because sometimes you don't have to say, it's either or. It doesn't necessarily mean that. But it could go, maybe today the program is 100% scale. Is there opportunity given that we may need to restructure? Without losing sight of the bigger goal, how do we look at reprioritizing these programs, say maybe to a 60% scale? That will still help us to drive that, but gives us the room for immediate restructuring, I guess, room in monetary sense to ensure the business flourish first. Because if the business doesn't flourish now, then that long term is also gone. So that's how I typically would look at it. And I usually go to conversations with C-suites and boards is data driven.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you look for allies? I mean, in this case, I mean, as you research and so on, do you look for allies to kind of like back you up on top of the data?
Yes and no. I think it depends on what the situation is. I have come to learn along the journey that often than not, allies that we may have, if it comes down to numbers and profits for the business, a lot of people won't stick their neck out. It is the reality. I mean, we like to believe that we live in an idea. Sorry, I'm a bit more cynical. The earlier one, I'm a bit more positive. I think, I mean, the reality is that there are too many stakes at play sometimes, right? And we may have allies to say we support, and in terms of how the program can get developed or supported, I think. But most often than not, when push comes to shove and the person's at a corner, they will not stick their neck out. And in the end, it is the CEO who has to stick their neck out. It is the CEO who says, this is my decision, and then I have to acknowledge the brunt that comes with it if it doesn't work. So it is also in this regard, question back to the lead, right? You gotta also have courage to ensure that you're gonna back this. And what I'm hearing is that it's very close to heart, but I would back it up with data as well. Because there's one thing about, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about my experience. So
Sure.
when I took over Omnicom Media Group Malaysia, it was very hard to pivot and transform mentalities that were originally there, right? In the way we treat our talents. I'm not saying we treat them bad, but just maybe like putting it at the forefront to go, times have changed and we need to rethink the way we do things. To employee policies, to thinking about how we think about expats, like transitioning expats properly when they come and join the organization and from another country. What do we do? How do we treat them? Every step of the way is a signal of how the company is. But it was very hard initially to pivot to help the executive leadership team to understand that as simple as how our talent communicate with an expat, for example, before they even join matters. How on the first day the people walk in matters. Like all these things matters, right? So it was hard to actually change that mindset. But did I just do it in one program like that? Honestly, no. It took me years to get to where we needed to be. Bits by bits, by breaking to say if my entire program about putting talent first and investing in people and making sure that we have proper training and leadership and great experience. We call it our EVP, or our employee value proposition. It took me 3 years for the EVP to truly reach somewhere, I would say a decent place. At the beginning, it was knowing that this is the goal. We broke it down bit by bit by bit because it was also we have to run the business. There was just not enough funds. We were not big enough. We haven't grown enough to be able to extend such leeways. So for me, it's the same advice as well to say, yes, this big program is important, but is there opportunity for you to chunk down and start to go, how do you find that balance with profits? Because without that, so you cannot move on to business.
Wow. Thanks for also adding in your personal experience on that. Again, I think what I'm learning from this conversation as well is, I think how we started out when I was introducing you, that you are great at straddling between the paradoxes. I think a lot of times, especially new managers, they think that it's always either or, very binary in this case, right? So if this cannot, then the other one is the answer in this case. But you have constantly, offered, like, what if it can have both? How does that even look like? So what if, for example, we have long-term in our site, but yet let's say we also need to understand about short-term. How does that look like, right? So you can look into the big picture as well as in the granular as well. And I think that is something which it's not said, but through your sharing and so on, I think new managers need to be able to understand as well. I think not even new managers, but generally managers need to be able to straddle both in terms of the paradoxes, to be able to see big and also look at small things. The other thing that I would like to probably add on to this letter writer is for this person to look at it as an opportunity rather than putting herself or himself into a position of like, kind of like a victim position, but more of like, okay, this is an opportunity for me, a defining opportunity for me to be able to show up, to also kind of put a stand, to make a stand in this case, right? And I think, like it or not, because this person is new in the executive table, the rest of them on the table would be also kind of, like it or not, would be judging to a certain extent, right? That's the reality of it. And I think to be able to make a stand, to make a decision, to be able to say this is how we intend to do it. I hear you. I hear about the short terms and long terms. So this is what is my plan. And to be able to also understand that even though this person may lose the battle in this case, right? That okay, let's say for example, they may just crap it out, for example. But what the impression that has been given to the rest of the executives is that, like, oh, okay, this person has a stand. This person, thought through this. I think that is important as well to build your reputation in this case, and not just to be a follower in this case, or just to to satisfy different parties and all.
Yeah.
I think that is also very important to be able to choose your battles as well, because ultimately it's the war that we want to win.
Yes.
So some things you just may have to like, okay, that's fine, but I will move on to
Yeah.
the next one.
And I think, I mean, when I saw the letter as well, I think sometimes we tell ourselves that we don't have the choice, but I think we do actually, like I said, right? So the choice is sometimes not either or. Sometimes the more courageous choice is actually finding a different ground to actually address it. And in the end, if let's say still really the decision is to can it, for example, what is the worst thing that can happen if the argument would not have been put forth? I think that is something that I also always ask myself, is that what is the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is actually inaction. That's the worst thing. Because even if you take an action and the action is wrong, people will still go, okay, long, so there was an action taken or there was a voice heard. I think the next thing is, like you said, right? Like the impression that's being left behind. I just probably want to do one addition, is that after that, once the decision is made, what are your actions after is very important. One is your C-suite, of course, in terms of impression, but you have to communicate, because then it is through your communication that you can manage the narrative and say, it is not that we have given up on our goal. It is not, this is still a priority. However, we do need to take some short-term intermediary actions right now. Please, you get what I mean? Like, all these things are actions that can be taken to manage situations, and will reflect better on the individual as well.
Wow. Okay. Let's come to a wrap for this letter. So what we're telling the letter writer to consider is, I think the big theme here is about short-term versus long-term. In this case, to understand that from at a C-suite level, these are things we should consider, because without thinking about short-term, there's not going to be a long-term, right? So, and how this letter writer can consider in bringing the case to the table is to back it up with data and facts, right? Versus emotions. So I think that's really important. And how would that look like? For example, once with data and facts, how would the middle ground looks like? Then is it about scaling it down? Is it about chunking into smaller pieces? In this case, like what Eileen has shared, for the program, for the employee program. In this case, it was not overnight, but it was across 3 years, right? So and not, I think what that shows, especially that story, shows that the focus and is still there, in terms of it is still there, that hasn't forgotten. It's just that it is now operating in a different way, probably like 3 years or 2 years and so on. I think that's very important. And the other thing is also to tell the letter writer is to have the mindset of that we do have a choice. It's not about feeling backed up in a corner and you have no choice. All of us have a choice, right? Hence, that's why we work in an agency. Ta-da! Anyway, sorry. So yes, all of us have agency, right? So we need to be able to understand that, and it's not a question about either or, but learning how to operate using A and D instead of either or in this case, right? So if and both things happen, how would that look like? So it's something for especially managers to look into, and once whatever decision has been made, it's also important then for this letter writer to be able to communicate it to the cause that she was championing, in this case, to communicate it clearly, to say why this has happened and why we took these decisions, so that the rest of the people would understand it rather than just keeping it so-called under wraps in this case.